Alferd Packer, a self-proclaimed mountain guide, walked into the Los Pinos Agency, a Ute reservation government, located in the Colorado Territory in April 1874, without the party of prospectors whom he was last seen with in February. It didn't take long before the local folks began to ask questions. Packer responded, saying he had suffered frostbite and had been left behind, also stated, he didn't know what happened to his clients nor where they ended up and was left with no choice but to walk out on his own. Speculation over the fate of the missing men followed Packer from saloon to saloon, where he flashed several wallets, raising more questions as to whom they belonged to. The talk grew louder from men who had entered the San Juan Mountains with Packer a few months before. They remembered Packer as incompetent, badly provisioned, and having no cash or rifle when they started out. On May 8, under pressure from the Indian Agency manager, General Charles Adams, Packer confessed to a dire turn of events that befell his party. Starting with the oldest, Israel Swan, 65 years of age, Packer explained, had succumbed to exhaustion, cold, and starvation. Due to the severe winter and being cut off and unable to continue on, Israel was eaten by the survivors. As others in the ill-fated party also died, each, Alfred said, agreed that they too would be eaten to save the others. This became a matter of fact until only Packer remained. He confessed to eating human flesh until the snow melted enough to find his way out of the wilderness. Sure, he took the dead men's valuables, they didn't need them anymore, Packer said with a smirk. A group of concerned citizens forcibly escorted Packer to the fatal site but found nothing. Packer was arrested on suspicion of murder and put in jail in nearby Saguache. The following August, an artist sent out by Harper's Weekly magazine to illustrate the fabled West came across a gruesome scene on Slumgullen Pass, just above the Gunnison River. John A. Randolph, the magazine's illustrator, carefully sketched a group of 5 hacked-up corpses. His report brought the coroner and many locals running. After burying the bodies, the crowd returned to Saguache to find that Packer had managed to escape the jail and frontier justice. He wasn't arrested until 9 years later, when someone recognized him in a Wyoming saloon. Emergency cannibalism was no crime then, or even today in the United States. What the local townspeople could not forgive was that he had presented himself as an experienced mountain guide and led trusting men to their doom. The question was whether Packer had deliberately murdered the others, in order to enrich himself. By the time the trial took place in newly established Lake City near the fatal scene, Packer was formally accused of only the premeditated murder and robbery of one of the prospectors, Israel Swan. Swan's relatives claimed that Israel left with more than $6,000 in cash and gold. He also carried with him an expensive Winchester rifle which would have presented more than enough motive for his murder. Based on that evidence alone was thought enough to hang Packer. Alfred G. Packer was born in 1842 in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, to James and Emily Packer. He enlisted for the Union in 1862 in Company F, 16th U.S. Infantry Regiment, Minnesota. He was honorably discharged shortly after for epilepsy. He enlisted in an Iowa regiment and was discharged again for the same reason. He decided to try his luck out west. In 1873, Packer cited his value as a mountain guide to gain entry for a group of prospectors into a larger group headed for Breckenridge, Colorado. Whether Packer had ever been in the area before is unknown. With, or without Packer's help, the group became lost. The men were half-starved when they stumbled across a winter camp of the Ute tribe in January 1874. Chief Ouray, the Ute leader, advised them to stay put until spring. Gold fever won over prudence. 2 smaller groups decided instead to head for the Los Pinos Agency between Saguache and Gunnison along a path detailed by Ouray. The first group's leader, Oliver D. Lautzenhiser, was fed up with Packer and threatened to shoot him if he followed. As snow fell, Lautzenhiser's group fashioned skis and eventually made it to the Indian Agency. Packer and 5 of his clients trudged behind at a safe distance. That was the last anyone saw of Packer's group. Packer took the stand in his own defense. He said he led the 5 men away from Ouray's recommended path to higher ground where the snow was lighter. They took shelter in a wooded area overlooking the Gunnison River, stranded by a blizzard. Provisions ran out and despair turned to madness. Packer said that he had left the party for a short time to look for landmarks to civilization. When he returned, 4 of the men had been slain and the killer, Shannon Wilson Bell, was roasting human meat over a fire. The crazed Bell attacked him, they struggled, and Packer killed Bell. He admitted to only minimal cannibalism. To no one's surprise, Packer was convicted of premeditated murder on Friday, April 13, 1882. According to Larry Dolan, a saloon owner who was a witness against Packer, Judge Melville B. Gary pronounced judgment in strong and colorful frontier language. "Stand up, you voracious man-eating summabitch. When you came to Hinsdale County, there weren't but 7 Democrats and you ate 5 of them. God damn you, I sentence you to be hanged by the neck until ya's dead, 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 as a warning against reducing the Democratic population of Hinsdale County. Packer, you Republican cannibal, I sentence you to hell, but the statutes forbid it." Packer's hanging was set for May 19, 1883, but legal appeals won him a new trial. The Colorado Supreme Court set aside the murder conviction because there had been no state murder statute in 1874, when Colorado was still a territory. Packer was retried in 1886 in Gunnison, this time on the charge of voluntary manslaughter of all 5 men. He was sentenced on June 8 to 40 years in the state penitentiary in Cannon City. He was then 43 years old. Packer was a model prisoner who kept busy with woodworking. A magnificent dollhouse he crafted is displayed in the Hinsdale County Museum in Lake City. After 16 years, Packer's bid for parole was rejected. His case came to the attention of Denver Post reporter Polly Pry. With the support of her paper, she appealed to Governor Charles Spalding Thomas for Packer's pardon. Thomas refused and cited threatening letters. He went on saying, "It was the foulest compositions that I have ever read." These were said to have come from Packer, written to his unsupportive relatives back east. The Denver Post campaigned to free Packer, and in 1901, Packer won conditional parole. The owners of the Denver Post, Frederick Gilmer Bonfils and Harry Hightaman, reportedly had plans for Packer to join a traveling circus they also owned. Governor Thomas thwarted that idea by requiring Packer to stay in Denver for at least 6 years. Packer worked as a security guard for the Post and later as a ranch hand. Neighbors knew him as a kindly storyteller, popular with children. He never won the official pardon he hoped for. Packer died at age 64, on April 24, 1907 following a stroke. He is buried in Littleton Cemetery under a modest military grave marker with the name Alfred, instead of Alferd, a name he himself sometimes used, Alferd Packer, Company F, 16th U.S. Infantry. Posthumously. Neither Packer nor his alleged victims were allowed to rest in peace. Packer's gravestone has been stolen and replaced at least once, and the Littleton Cemetery Association eventually covered the grave in cement in 1973, to discourage any further vandalism. Superintendent John Hauser says the Cemetery Association believes Packer's body to be intact. Others claim that Packer's head was separated from his body before the burial. It was then dissected and sold to a traveling sideshow until it wound up in the hands of an oddities collector who sold it about 10 years ago to the famous curiosity exhibitor, Ripley's Believe It or Not. "It's true, we have Alferd's head," says Edward Meyer, Vice President of Exhibits and Archives for Ripley's Entertainment Inc. in Orlando, Florida. "He was on exhibit in our New Orleans facility until Hurricane Katrina hit." Packer's head was reassigned to the Ripley's Museum in San Antonio, Texas, in 2008. Myers would not disclose how Ripley's was able to determine the authenticity of the relic, except that the seller's information was enough to convince us. He did admit the purchase price was well in the neighborhood of $20,000. Mummies don't come cheap. Technically, Packer's head was not mummified. Meyer says the separation and preservation as an educated guess took place shortly after his death. Arsenic was probably used to preserve the skin, a method common in embalming until banned in the early 1900s. However, before that happened, the head was neatly dissected and the brain removed. All that's holding everything together are a series of little metal hooks, says Meyer. People in those days were interested in knowing if there was anything unusual about a famous criminal's brain. The bodies of those Packer was convicted of killing were also disturbed for the purpose of science. They were exhumed in 1989 when forensics law professor Dr. James Starrs, of the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., obtained permission to head an archaeological dig with a team of experts. The bones were dated and identified in the anthropology labs at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. In a 1990 article titled Victims Exhumation Project, Lake City, Colorado, July 17, 1989, for the quarterly journal Scientific's Looking Review, Starrs stated that the results proved that Packer was, indeed, a murdering cannibal and a liar. The bodies were reinterred under a cement slab on the spot of their original burial on August 15, 1989. A large plaque, a smaller memorial stone, and 5 small plain white crosses marked the spot where the remains of Shannon Wilson Bell, Israel Swan, James Humphrey, Frank Reddy Miller, and George California Noon are buried. However, in 1994, David P. Bailey, curator of history at the Museum of Western Colorado, undertook an investigation to turn up more conclusive results than stars. In the Audrey Thrakill collection of firearms owned by the museum was a Colt revolver that had reportedly been found at the site of Packer's alleged crime. Exhaustive investigation into the pistol's background turned up documents from the time of the trial. A Civil War veteran that visited the crime scene stated that Shannon Bell had been shot twice and the other victims were killed with a hatchet. Upon careful study of Bell, he noticed a severe bullet wound to the pelvic area and that Bell's wallet had a bullet hole through it. This seems to corroborate Packer's claim that Bell had killed the other victims and that Packer shot Bell in self-defense. By 2000, Bailey had not yet proven a link between the antique pistol and Alferd Packer, but he discovered that forensic samples from the 1989 exhumation had been archived, and analysis in 2001 with an electron microscope by Dr. Richard Tujay at Mesa State College, found microscopical head fragments in the soil taken from under Shannon Bell's remains that were matched by spectrograph with the bullets remaining in what was indeed believed to be Packer's pistol. While it appears certain that Bell was killed by a gunshot, the question of whether or not it was murder still remains unanswered.